This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall and Stephen Maresca.
Welcome to Cybersound, everybody. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, and always joined by Steve Maresca and Matt Fasaro. Hey, guys.
Hello.
So it is the end of 2021. So I think we're going to do the obligatory 2021 year in review episode. And I think we spent some time talking about this, obviously ahead of time, and I think selected 4 or 5 things that we would consider to be reasonably substantive, right? Trying not to touch on everything that happened over the year. And we debated the first one a little bit, I think early on, because 2020 probably marked the real, the year of the transition from the traditional office environment to home work. But I think 2021 sort of has seen the solidification of that, right? We flirted with the idea of going back to the offices for a variety of reasons. Maybe haven't, but work from home is now pretty well embedded in culture. I think people expect that to be the norm going forward. I think people expect that as they're talking to employers. From a security standpoint, I think that's been a big change, and I don't see any reason to think it's going backwards.
Yeah, we thought we were going to be going back into the office, right? That did not happen. And with that being the new standard, we had a lot of people reach out to us over the year, kind of wondering how they could better deal with it. There are a lot of places had no remote management of these systems, right? They kind of just expected that these systems would be in the organization, or if they were going to be out, they'd be out for a short period of time. That definitely didn't happen.
And that sea change certainly today has echoes, as you're suggesting. Orgs are trying to claw back the systems that they procured and let out the door in a hurry. Data's not necessarily under the best control. I think it's still a problem that many organizations are struggling with. Certainly, quite a few have returned to the office as a subset, but the truth is a decent enough proportion still have people out, are contemplating returns to home at the moment. It's not going away, and the same problems that we experienced in 2020 still persist. We've had multitudes of conversations about remote access struggles, facilitating policy across the perimeter that no longer exists. It's a struggle, and I don't think anyone has really tackled it completely.
Yeah, I think it's going to actually be very interesting when we see companies trying to maybe consolidate all these new services they bought to support all this, right? So you've got a lot of places that signed up for different, remote meeting types of software. You've got VPN implementations that happened. They've opened up services they wouldn't have normally opened up. That's definitely hit people pretty hard, and that's why ransomware has been such a big deal this past year, right? But we saw a lot of purchases that maybe are going to get reevaluated or changed.
Some will stick around, certainly. The hurried move to home wasn't necessarily coupled with multi-factor, 2-factor deployments. Right. This year has seen a large number of them to continue supporting that type of work, as well as more generally protect environments. Of course, that's a net improvement, right? But it's sort of the coupled component to what you just mentioned, Matt.
It's not just security though that has changed as a result of this. We're seeing just connectivity in general, be much more important in the home. You've got kids or a spouse that are home, competing for bandwidth. A lot of the collaboration that you referred to in terms of the Zoom, the Teams, the GoToMeetings, those are all bandwidth hungry apps. And if you're going to be home, some companies now are talking about dedicated connections for their employees and actually, making modifications to that home office where, probably in 2020 it was much more like, go home and use your cable modem. And that doesn't always work.
Yeah, I mean, the providers were as nice as they can be. I know a lot of them took their bandwidth limits off for a while. I think a lot of that has come back or is coming back at this point. I know my provider is definitely back with it. But yeah, so some people are going to be getting bills that they don't exactly want.
Yeah, I mean, there's opportunities to make some more money if you're in the data moving business, right? So, and obviously, 2021, just a tremendous amount of ransomware, right? And we refer to it often as sort of the security plague. It's been a huge cause of mostly every incident response job that we've done. Maybe a couple specifically targeted ones, but largely it's opportunistic ransomware opportunities, and hugely effective. Generally, common ways of sort of getting that foothold. Phishing and exploiting patches and missing vulnerabilities, but I mean, tons of them. And I don't see any reason to expect that they're going to slow or stop, in the year ahead.
And certainly, ransomware is not new in 2021. The biggest thing that we want to convey at the moment is that the sophistication, rigor, and general complexity of attacks has largely shifted. All along the way, it's been caused by vulnerabilities at the perimeter. It's caused by identity theft or credential theft and similar types of weaknesses. But in 2021, biggest changes were a shift from merely encryption to behavior where exfiltration of data is almost a guarantee, especially at the tail end of 2021. It's referred by some organizations as double extortion. You're paying to recover your data and preserve some of your reputation because your organizational data is out in the open. That's not going away. If anything, it's becoming the de facto expectation of a ransomware attack.
Honestly, it's awfully clever. I mean, the first time that we ran across the double extortion, I thought, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, just
right.
Yeah, if you're looking to get money, that's the way.
It sure is. And you're absolutely right, Steve. Right, ransomware has been around a long time. I think for us, what we felt was most substantive was the shift a little bit towards infrastructure style attacks. Right, we saw some really newsworthy events. Colonial Pipeline being one, certainly, where I think the risk of critical infrastructure being targeted or services that you're used to being impacted from these is just greater, and no reason to expect that to go back.
Right, and other topical things that were in the news, the meatpacking plants being attacked. Most recently, in the last week or so, Kronos, the timekeeping company, being attacked. Many employers affected as a result. Ultimately, attacks against organizations that have greater involvement in everyone's day-to-day life, regardless of their employer, regardless of their industry. That's the next.
This is really front and center now. It's not just, you don't just hear it on the news because your local school got ransomware. Now it's, I'm not getting packages or oil prices are being affected, things like that. It's much more front and center now.
Right. They bleed into the real world. These attacks cause purchasing changes, as you're alluding to.
Right.
Certain parts of the eastern seaboard had no gas for 3 weeks because people decided to buy it in a panic. Doesn't mean that there's a supply issue necessarily, but these are the downstream effects of attacks of this variety.
Yeah. Another thing that kind of changed a lot too was the things we learned about a lot of the groups that are doing this, right? It's almost frightening to think about a lot of infrastructure that we care about, right? Things that are like power plants and things that drive daily life are really hanging on some spoken agreement that a lot of these groups just won't go after it. Right. That could be broken at any time for any reason. There'll be groups that are just not going to participate in that and do it anyway. But the intelligence that we got out of government intelligence in the U.S. at least, they have, I guess, struck deals with these people to say, hey, don't touch this, right? And we don't know what that's going to look like in a year from now.
I mean, interestingly, right, the group responsible for Colonial Pipeline, in a certain way, I don't think fully expected the outcome of their actions. So that they stepped back and actually apologized for the attack on the infrastructure, because I think they felt the whole weight of the government coming down. And these tend to be sort of ROI driven events and not necessarily, hey, I want to cause this huge disruption. I think in that case, it was more than the attacker bargained for.
Yeah, this was the first year, I believe, that there was actually some type of interaction with them and reaction, if you will. Right. They tried to shut down an entire group, which has not been done yet.
Well, there's there's also that push of let's not negotiate with terrorists to some degree, right?
Right, and actually that's where I was about to go.
I figured.
Matt mentioned the government, so naturally I'm thinking about the Department of Treasury. The guidance that's been issued by federal law enforcement is effectively that thou shalt not pay a ransom. It's obviously a good idea for the organizational bottom line, but at the end of the day as well, there are treaties, there are embargoes, there are a variety of reasons that you don't want to support organizations that are themselves performing ransomware attacks. And ultimately, if there are regulated areas of the government, if there are regulated businesses, it may actually reflect very poorly on those organizations if they are to pay a ransom. So the directive ultimately is to avoid it. And I think that that's a unique change. It's come out of CISA. It's come out of Department of Treasury. Typically, prior to that, there were really no comments about whether organizations should or should not pay. And it's a notable change that at least in 2021, people should be aware of if they weren't.
And I think that it's easy to say, a lot of organizations have gotten better about, data backups, right? So the risk of legitimately losing data and have that huge sort of business impacting event as a result of this are a little bit lower, because I think people understand how to protect themselves against ransomware. And frankly, that's partly what makes that double extortion concept so brilliant, right? Because ultimately they're saying, hey, you probably have access to your data and can restore, but by the way, we also have access to your data and we're going to release it. And
right.
It's an interesting evolution, and I think it's one of those where an action causes another reaction, and then other things you have to think about that probably, frankly, weren't anticipated when this was going down. In a way, I hate to say it, but kudos to being clever. I mean, these things evolve, and I think it's really important to watch how these change so regularly. The other big thing that I think that we're seeing is a variety of entities, right? I'd say, insurance carriers being one. There's legislation in some cases that are suggesting that people develop more mature security programs. I think we're finally seeing now not just vague references in specific industries to adhere to a security standard, but a much broader outcry to say, if you follow a security standard, you're going to have a better security program with less risk. And we're seeing that push, and we're seeing that trend, over and over now. And I think we're finally getting to a point where people have to adopt or really have to reasonably consider a security standard to align their security program to.
Historically, the norm was, it's probably a good idea to follow security best practices. Now the shift is, all right, we asked you to think about it before. Now, please demonstrate. And that's the bigger change ultimately, if I were to boil it down. It's now necessary, even from a business-to-business standpoint, to prove that data exchange and similar is protected in a rigorous kind of way, as well as the processes and controls in organizations to support that type of thing.
Yeah, there's just too much sensitive data and data that affects people's daily lives at this point where these things are needed, right? It's just a public protection type thing. How effective that's going to be, what that remains to be seen, right? I think a lot of this is dragging its feet behind the progression of technology and threats and things like that, but it's a start.
I mean, I'm somewhat encouraged to finally see it. I mean, let's be honest. In 2021, almost every person who has credit cards, credit agencies, you name it, some degree of insurance against identity theft, they've had their identity stolen. They've received a notification. The fact that it's a norm and it's taken organizations until 2021 to have more rigor about actually pursuing security maturity is unfortunate, but I'm encouraged to finally see it.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I think we're finally at a point where it feels like a well-organized discipline. I mean, we've all been in this field now for, give or take 15 or 20 years. And, it started out with, network security person saying, install a firewall, to finally get into this point where you say, there are things that you have to do to be more secure. And I think people are listening to that and starting to move in the right direction, which is great. I think finally, we wanted to chat a little bit about the fact that 2021 was probably the year of some really high profile vulnerabilities and, really impactful things to systems as commonplace as, Exchange, for example. And probably more severe than previous years. Certainly, we feel that the vulnerabilities that we've seen have been more impactful to a broader base than probably before.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
The SANS Internet Storm Center raised its they call it Infocon plan, DEFCON, and similar. Their level to orange. That hasn't happened in a very long time. But more generally, I think the breadth of affected organizations of the vulnerabilities that occurred in 2021 is far, far more substantial than in previous years, and that's the notable change.
And a lot of them were simple to actually exploit too. I think that was a difference too, and maybe kind of what contributed to it being so high profile. Right, we had, especially Exchange in the most recent Log4j. These things did not take a lot of effort or sophisticated attackers to do anything with, and it's stuff that ran a lot of organizations.
Right.
So that's why we're seeing it so much in the spotlight,
and aren't easy necessarily to update, right? So I think what we're finding as a challenge is Exchange had multiple patches over multiple months, and Exchange is hard to upgrade for a lot of people. And Log4j, difficult to really get clarity on, how pervasive is it in your environment and what you actually need to fix. And you're heavily reliant in some cases on hardware vendors to fix that and some other things. So high profile and not easy to address.
Yeah, Log4j did two things. I think it really brought to the forefront the very basic thing that we tell everyone is you need inventory of things, right? Nobody had any idea where this thing was running, right? It took, I think, most organizations quite a bit of, probably the better of 2 days, right, to actually find out all the software that they were using that might have that installed and to actually have that remediated. And then the other thing was realizing that you're relying on software sometimes that, I think it was just a couple people that actually manage Log4j from a code development standpoint. Right. These things are propping up large enterprise level type software, and
their support base is low.
Yeah.
Well, that and it's embedded everywhere. Exchange, right. Everyone, well, not everyone, but most organizations use Exchange. Most organizations with web apps or complex business intelligence, business management, HCM type capabilities, they use Java stacks. It's embedded everywhere. The ubiquity of some of these underlying pieces of infrastructure mean that even organizations that weren't quite aware that they might be impacted were, in fact, when they looked a little closer. I don't know. One unique aspect of that is that the issues we've just gone over. So proxy shell for Exchange, Log4Shell or whatever you want to call it for the Log4j issue, Print Nightmare. Those were all things that use deeply embedded components of the operating systems or application stacks. Exchange and Log4j were largely vulnerabilities exposed over the network perimeter to the internet. Obviously, there are lots of internal apps that are vulnerable with those issues, but the point is that the accessibility of some of the vulnerable services was unusually high with some of the vulnerabilities in the last year. And that's a defining factor because the whole world was left scrambling as a result.
Yeah, I think what this past year kind of showed us is that if there are weaknesses in software that gets used quite a bit, people are going to find them now. There's just enough people looking. There's better tools out there now that used to be very difficult to use. They're actually very accessible, or in some cases open source completely. So it's not very difficult to get into this anymore.
Other infrastructure that meets a similar level of ubiquity, virtualization, VMware, hypervisors are now being attacked. Certainly, we've seen that in some of our incidents in the last year, and it makes sense. I would want to attack a VMware infrastructure if I were a malicious entity. It's just easier to undermine systems that are otherwise better protected. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway. Vulnerabilities are being prioritized for those that have the largest possible impact with lowest effort. And certainly that's of course the goal from any security researcher or malicious entity's perspective. But the fact that we've had so many so quickly over a multitude of months is, cause for a lot of pain in 2021, compounded by the fact that it seems as though each of them has had multiple patches that, didn't quite resolve them.
Well, so there's two things that have jumped out to me over the year. I feel like there's been a variety of times where we've all sat in a room and said, wow, I've never seen that before. And I don't feel like I've, in the last couple of years have had those discussions. And, the double extortion stuff, the first time we saw it, we're like, well, that's something. And the attack on, VMware specifically in some cases, we didn't see. And I think sort of the other part is discussion around, hey, we need to craft communication to our clients, and yet we can't give explicit guidance on how to address something. And that's been really challenging, right? We really like to say, here's a known vulnerability or a new vulnerability, and here's how you fix it. In a lot of cases, it's been, here's something really new, and by the way, we need to let this develop a little bit before we give you clarity on how to move forward. And that's been different for sure. We kind of talked about 4 of them. Any one in particular jump out to you as, hey, this is something I want to watch, maybe going forward, or something that really makes you concerned about kind of where we're going as an industry, out of curiosity?
Vulnerabilities are sort of a constant background noise. There will be years where it's similar to 2021 in terms of urgency and tempo. Others will be quieter. That requires constant attention. I think ransomware has been regularly in the mind of defenders for long enough that it's relatively well understood. I would say that the things to keep in mind are more along the lines of the maturity requirements that are cropping out of the woodwork, because they're a bit of a surprise for some organizations. And we'll be talking about that as in a more detailed way for cyber liability for sure. Right. These are requirements that organizations require must require self-reflection, introspective attention, and a lot of the time that's not prioritized. And it's now the time to think about that.
I mean, that's the one that jumps out to me. I feel a certain amount of optimism that insurance carriers are pushing this a little bit more aggressively. That there's some regulatory requirements in certain industries that we're seeing, but there's a general. It feels like there's more of a buzz around adhere to a standard and improve your program. And I feel like that it's so necessary, because I find so often we're in that reactive space a lot, right? In instant response. I'm really optimistic that we'll move a little bit more into a proactive space, and companies will start to really pay attention to these fundamental components of a lot of these frameworks and make some improvements. So with that, as always, we welcome people to reach out to us on LinkedIn at Vancord, or on Twitter at Vancord Security. Continue this discussion. I suspect there are people who would say, hey, there's a bunch of really notable things that you missed in your 2021 year in review. And we're all ears, right? If there's something that you think jumps out to you that we just didn't cover, we're happy to either follow up with that with a subsequent episode, or hear why maybe you think one of the things that we put in this list probably doesn't belong there. We're interested in all of that. As always, we hope you got some value out of this and found it interesting, and continue listening to future episodes. Thanks everybody for listening.
Stay vigilant. Stay resilient. This has been Cyber Sound.